Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you guys for letting me come back. I don't know if most of you or some of you were here a few weeks ago when I was sharing with you guys talking about self-care, and one of the reasons why I like to start with that rather than starting with the marriage is because it's important, if you're going to do this marriage stuff, that you are taking care of yourself, because that still is the priority. Because all this marriage stuff can be really hard. I'm just curious, I should have asked this probably before, but how many of you guys have been married like more than 10 years? Can y'all like raise your hand? Yeah, I can see you guys. Okay, how about less than 5 years? Is there any okay, I see a few, okay. And then the rest of you are probably in the middle. Any like less than 3 years? I can't really see anybody. Is there anybody raising their hand? No. Okay. So we've got, how about less or more than 20 years? Some pros in there. All right. So I want to just share with you guys. So I've been married for 23 years now. And I've also been working with couples and families for a little bit over 20 years as well. And so I'll share with you guys, when I first came up with this list, it was probably a little bit over 10 years ago. And I was actually asked by a mom's group to come and speak on marriage. And at the time, I was like, oh, wow, I don't know that I'm an expert on this at all. Like, I know I've always been super passionate about the topic of marriage, and I know it's super important. But it was a time where I was also like really kind of struggling, like in my own marriage. And so I kind of thought, well, I don't really feel, something just didn't feel right about, standing in front of all these moms and saying, this is how you should have a great marriage. But I felt like I could definitely say, what are the things that you should not do? What are the things that are mistakes in marriage? And so I kind of came up with this list. And so I want to share with you guys based on that. I know, and just to give you a little bit more background. So I, majored in psychology. I've been in the counseling field, forever. And, I kind of have that, obviously that bent to a different perspective. My husband is a computer guy. So he's in the IT field, and we are similar in many ways related to our values and our beliefs, but short of that is pretty much where the similarities stop. And so he is a computer guy through and through, and he thinks very sequentially and very logically, and there's an order for things. And, and so, but what's great about my husband is he is very, he loves to talk. He loves to have conversation. He loves to communicate. And so I feel like God has kind of given me this window into the mind of a man that thinks completely different from me. And so what's really neat is, when I do work a lot with couples. And so when I am sitting with couples, ironically, a lot of my clients are husbands who are in the either computer field or IT field or accountant field, or also a lot of salespeople. So those tend to be the top jobs that are represented in the counseling world when it comes to men. And so I do understand that mind. And so I want to really share with you guys why this is so important. I know we're in the topic related to, like, we're all moms. And so we're talking about this in context of being a mom, and context of like raising kids, and why is this even important, and is this important? And so I just want to say real quick, like, yes, it is like super important. I can tell you my, some of my best moments with my kids have been when, I felt like things were just really good, and my husband and I were in a good place, and I felt like I had those extra, just internal resources to just deal with life, and to pour 100% of my energy into helping them work through their temper tantrums or their, whatever, their anxieties or whatever. But when, things were off with my husband and I wasn't, it was just so much more, it was so much harder. And so I can honestly say that some of my worst moments as a mom, some of the moments I look back and think, oh, I wish I handled that differently. It wasn't even so much about my kids. It was because I was distracted, because my head was in a different place, because I was upset, or I was stewing on something, or I was, upset about something related to my marriage. And so it all correlates. Your kids, they love seeing you and your husband getting along. You know, it's so good for them. I can see, you know, even now. So I think for those of you that weren't here last time I shared, my son is now 15. And my daughter, I think she's probably had a birthday since I was here, so she's now 13. And even now I can see, like, they'll get little smiles on their faces, you know, when they see us getting along. And it makes kids feel secure. And the other way around too, when they see us going, you know, bickering with each other, it does not, you know, it does not do good for their souls. So, did you guys, so Amy, you did send out the email, like everybody got the, okay. All right. So the first thing here, and I want to just say too, don't feel this like as a thing of judgment, because these are things, when I say, like, you know, the mistakes that wives we tend to make, these are the things that naturally we tend to just do. This is our kind of default mode. So this isn't like, wow, if you've done anything on this list, like you're a bad wife, like absolutely not. These are the things that, again, like probably every one of us, maybe not all these things. I can tell you I've done every one of these things in some form or fashion at some point in my own marriage. But I think constantly seeing how can we do it better. So number one, not prioritizing your marriage. You guys have, you know, probably a lot of you have small kids. You know, maybe some of you have teenagers, you know, or different ages, whatever. And it's exhausting. It is absolutely exhausting. You're physically tired, especially if they're little. When they're older, it's emotionally exhausting. You're tired. And so, you know, by the time that you deal with all the little needs and all of the, you know, the diaper changes, or like the feeding all the meals or making all the meals or whatever it is you have to do, like there's just not a lot of time and energy, you know, to focus on like being a mom. And then you don't feel like you did probably when you like first met your husband and when you guys started going on dates. Like you don't feel, you're not that. And so it's very easy to put all of your energy into just being a mom. And it's great to put energy into being a mom, but remember that your kids feel more secure when they see you and your husband connecting like that. You know, sometimes I think as moms, we feel like, well, I don't want to ignore my kids by just spending time with, you know, my husband. But interestingly enough, like kids like get that. They seem to actually like that. And so, you know, there was a thing that I know I've heard a lot of people do where they call it like couch time, you know, where, you know, when, you know, your husband first comes home, or when you first come home, or whoever's coming home first, you know, go spend a few minutes, you know, before you're, you know, the whole family is together, but just spend a few minutes kind of reconnecting, you know, with your husband. I know for me, you know, my husband and I, we walk the dogs together at night, and that seems to be a good time. And our kids know, like, that's the time that our kids are older, so we can leave them at the house, or they trail behind or ahead, or ride their skateboards around or whatever. But, you know, that's time that we can really talk and catch up on related to our marriage. I remember for myself, it was even like, you know, I had wanted to be a mom for so many years. Like we, you know, went through infertility and did not, you know, have kids right away. And so by the time we had kids, I was like, okay, this is like my world. This is what I want to do. And so I remember our kids were little, and it was our 10-year anniversary, and my husband wanted to take me away on this like nice trip. And I was like, I don't want to go. I don't want to leave my kids. Like, I really didn't want to leave my kids. I remember talking to my friend, and she was like, Julie, you have to do this for your marriage. Like, you have to do this. And I was like, I don't want to. I really don't want to. I want to be here with my kids. And she made me do it. And I did it, and it was wonderful, and we had an amazing time. And I surprised myself at how much I was able to really disconnect, and, you know, left the kids with the grandparents. And it was awesome, and they were in great hands. And so I encourage you guys, if you have the opportunity and your husband is, you know, willing and, you know, like able, like, go for it. You know, your kids are, you know, going to be fine. So number 2 on the list is insisting on doing it your way. And initially I had here, like, insisting on it, doing it your way too much, but then I added also, like, not enough, because I think you can kind of lean towards either side of the spectrum. You know, there's times that you do need to stick up for yourself and be like, you know, this is important. You know, not every hill is worth dying on. That's kind of the phrase I use, but there are some times that you do need to, like when it comes to self-care things, and you know, things that you do need to do that are going to help keep you, you know, mentally or emotionally sane, you know, and you do need to tell your husband, like, hey, this is super important to me. I really need to do this. So that's the one side. But the other side is, I think, so I grew up in Orlando. So one of the things about growing up in Orlando, I was born and raised, I know there's a good number of us out there, but not a ton, is you literally grow up being called a princess. Like you go anywhere on Disney property and they're like, hi, princess, hi, princess. And so it's kind of funny. It's kind of a quirky little thing. I realize that people that don't grow up in Orlando and around Disney, like they don't deal with. And so, and then we see the princess movies and we're always told, oh, you're a princess. And so then we get married and our husband doesn't necessarily think we're a princess. Our husband thinks like that we're just like a person and he loves us. That's why he married us. But I guess my point in that is you're not going to always have it your way. And that's okay. And that's healthy. And that's normal. And your husband, you know what, is actually just as important as you are. And I know that you know that, but I think to be reminded that if you are always getting things your way, like if you can't relate to that feeling of like, wow, we did this and I really didn't want to, but I know my husband really wanted to. And so that was good. If you can't relate to that feeling, then something's off. Because there's no way that you and your husband agree on every single thing. And there's no way that everything that you do in your, spare time together, that you guys 100% agree always. So I want you to know too, like I'm not just totally taking all of this from my own personal experience, although a lot of it I am. I also do work a lot with couples. And so every single thing on this list is something that I've seen repeated many, 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 many times with a lot of couples. And so what I see a lot is that, there usually is, one person in the relationship that tends to be more assertive and more comfortable, like stating their opinions or what they want or how they want things to go. And then you tend to have the other one that tends to be more focused on just kind of keeping things peaceful and tends to maybe be a little bit more conflict avoidant. And so what can happen in a relationship like that is that the one that is a little bit more assertive just assumes that the more non-assertive one just agrees with them on everything that they think. And I can tell you that's probably not the case. And so again, especially if the more assertive one tends to be, also sometimes expresses their anger in strong ways or whatever, then, that if you might be one where your husband, and I see this a lot with husbands that tend to be more like non-assertive. They just kind of want to keep things peaceful. That what can be really bad is then the husband starts to just really disengage. And so he might, show up and be there and kind of try to not cause problems and not cause conflict. But his heart's not in it. And he's not really, he's not putting himself out there in the relationship. And so you start to kind of wonder, why doesn't he ever want to spend time with me? Or why doesn't he really want to talk with me? Or why does he seem like he's not as engaged in our family? And so, again, if you're always getting your way, just take that as a signal, like maybe you should check in a little bit more with your husband. The other thing I want to mention about that is, a lot of times I've seen husbands, particularly, if you tend to be one that expresses your emotions more strongly, they can just really get overwhelmed and they'll just shut down. And so one of the differences between men and women, and if any of you guys have ever done the Emerson Eggerichs Love and Respect series, he is an amazing teacher. And I really enjoy hearing him speak even more than reading his books. But he talks about one of the basic differences between how men and women deal with conflict is when men are in conflict with another man, they know instinctually to back off and give that man space. They know that it's the honorable thing to do. The honorable thing, like if you think of just men the way they're wired and with their testosterone and, think of like a, military battle situation. If you see that another man is triggered and he might lose it, you're going to say, hey, dude, you take your space. I'll be over here. Let me know when you want to talk. Women, we're exactly the opposite. If we see another woman who is upset or if she's triggered or she's dealing with something emotional, we like press in. Oh, are you okay? Let's talk about it. Like what happened? Tell me about it. And so we get closer and we pursue them even more. So you can see where this is literally a recipe for disaster in marriage, because the more upset you get, the more he thinks you just need space. And in his mind, he is doing the honorable thing by giving you space and by backing off and putting distance in the relationship. But for women, because what we do when we care about somebody is we push in and we press on and we pursue them, we assume he doesn't even care. He does not even care. Here I am falling apart. I am so upset. And he is just like, whatever. Like so it creates like this recipe for so much misunderstanding and so much hurt. And then, the husband feels completely like he thinks you're crazy because if you're so upset and why are you pursuing him this way? And then you think he's just completely like, it's almost, I think for us, it can be perceived as an act of like hostility, the fact that he's just disengaging. So that's a really interesting dynamic, which, happens a lot. The other one, the next one, the third one, I'm not going to spend too much time on this because this could be a whole hour, which, I don't know if y'all want to hear about that, but the underestimating the importance of sex. Typically speaking, and let me just say there are definite exceptions to this, and there's definitely marriages where I've seen it absolutely flip-flopped. And so the wife is way more interested in sex than the husband. And so I want to say that first because that's a very painful thing when this topic is discussed, and that is the dynamic in your marriage. But the majority of the time, it is usually the husband that is way more interested, and that's God just kind of wired men that way. And so if you think about it, most men, if they're being honest, will say that that is one of their top desires. That is one of the things that they are the most interested in a marriage partner. And so if you, and by the way, God made them that way. They're not jerks because they feel that way. So if you think about that, that is such an important desire for them. And by them marrying you, they have literally agreed for the rest of their life till death do us part, that the only person that they will ever legitimately have this need and desire met with for the rest of their life is you. So think about that. Like one of their most important, most significant desires and needs, agreeing to have it solely met only by one person, which is you, for the rest of their life. Like that's a big deal. And I'm not saying that for you to feel like pressure, because I absolutely don't think that that's healthy, but to take it seriously. And so to not, I think we don't realize as women how much our husbands, like even their self-esteem is tied to the way we respond to like him pursuing you in that way. And so to be, don't treat him like he's some like sex crazed like jerk, like that just like cares about that and doesn't care about you, because that's just not true. The other thing that's interesting is that one of the ways biologically that a man is able to feel, like how women, when you are like breastfeeding, like the oxytocin is that hormone that is released, like when you're like holding a baby and breastfeeding, and like that cuddle, like what we call it, like the cuddle hormone. Men don't like get that from like holding babies, but they get it in like massive quantities, like when they're having sex with their wife. And so that is one of the ways like that they feel connected, they feel close to you. And so another dynamic that's really interesting is that, so, your husband get in a big fight, he immediately wants to have sex, and you're like, what's your problem? We haven't even like finished resolving this. Like things are not okay yet. How can you want that? You obviously don't even care about me because we haven't even finished having this conversation, and I'm not okay with you. So how can you be okay? Blah, blah, blah. Okay. So, but the thing is that men, like their hearts, like for whatever reason, I don't know why God made it this way. I really don't. I'll talk to him about that someday. But their hearts open up, like, and I think part of it is this chemical, like after sex, whereas women, it's the opposite. Like women, like we need to have things okay. We need to know that we're in a good place, that emotionally we're connected, that all the issues are resolved. That, and so I think what it does, I think in a healthy marriage, is it forces you to kind of battle this out. It forces you to have those conversations, and it forces you both to give. It forces the husband sometimes to say, you know what, I really don't want to talk right now. I really don't want to have another hour-long conversation about this, but okay, this is important to you. I will do that. You should give on that sometimes. But there's other times, that I think being sensitive, that he really just wants to be close to you and he doesn't know how. Like he just doesn't necessarily have the right words. And so again, making sure that that's just keep that on your radar. The other thing I'll say about that is I've heard from a lot of women who feel like, and I don't know if it's just like the perception that they've seen the movies or, media or whatever, that, every sexual encounter has to be like this idyllic type of thing where it's like this, long drawn out, like romantic, kind of like how you don't want it like in the movies or whatever. That's not necessarily realistic at all, and not even necessarily helpful. And if that's your idea, then it's going to absolutely feel utterly exhausting. And so it doesn't have to be that way. So that's all I'll say about that for right now. Okay, so the next one is, this one is super important, is criticizing his way of doing things. I think as moms, this is probably one of our biggest mistakes as a mom, is we read so many books on like parenting and how we're raising our babies and our children. And, we come to these meetings and we learn things, and we talk with other moms, we get ideas, and we read, blogs, whatever. And so we've really done a lot of work into like, how do you do this right? And then like, maybe you go out for the night or you go out for a few hours, and like you come back and your husband is like completely done it like all wrong. He's done it all wrong. And you're like, well, what are you doing? And then after a while, he just stops doing it at all. Like he just stops like helping. And we're like, now you don't even care? Like, what's the problem? Like, why are you like completely not even like helping? And, he says, well, because every time I did, I wasn't doing it right. So he kind of has a point, he does. And so again, I think, it is my belief that I think kids do need a mom and a dad, and they need the parts of that both moms and dad bring to the table. And I can tell you like so many nights, I would be so frustrated because I work in the evenings, I do appointments, usually after, even when my kids were little, like, I would wait till my husband would come home from work, and then, we'd have dinner, and then I would go off and do appointments at night. And then the idea was that he would, when I was gone, like be giving them baths, getting them ready for bed, and I would come home and they would all be nicely sleeping in their little beds with their baths. And that just didn't happen a lot. I mean, but what would happen is I would come home and they had like these great bonding times, and they were all keyed up and running around the house because they were having like tickle fights, and maybe they weren't like bathed at all, and maybe they definitely weren't like sleeping or whatever, but that was part of their connecting, that was part of their bonding. And so again, there's a balance. I think, again, looking to my one about like insisting on, your way versus, always versus never. I think you definitely do need to communicate things that are important to you, but realize he's going to do it differently. Another big one on this is date night. I've talked to so many, couples that will come in, and they come in and they're just feeling disconnected. They don't ever spend time together. They don't have anything in common. They live separate lives, and they don't really ever do anything together. And so as we get into kind of the history of how did it come about that you never do anything together, it usually starts at the beginning of the marriage. He would try to plan things and he would try to do things, but it was never really the right thing, or it was never really that fun for her, or it was never kind of how she wanted to do it. And so he finally just stopped, and he finally just kind of gave up, and then she felt like he didn't care, and then she got bitter and angry. And so, I mean, this is kind of how this can go. So, recognize the effort. If he's willing to, if he's trying, that is super important. And so, be very careful, and and criticizing, just it not being your way all the time. The other thing that the point that I share with couples a lot is that another way that men are wired is men like to feel like, so okay, women, we kind of measure our self-worth a lot based on the quality of our relationships. Men tend to measure their self-worth more based on how successful they are in their endeavors. Usually that's highly related to their work, but also just in things that they're trying to accomplish. And so men are going to pour their energy into areas where they feel like they can be successful. So if you want your husband to do more of something, catch him doing it right, and then bring that to his attention, and then focus on that. If you want him to help out more in the kitchen, and there's one night that he just goes and you didn't even ask, and he, starts like unloading the dishwasher, be like, oh my gosh, thank you so much. And like make such a big deal about that. I know you do it every day, multiple times a day, and so it really shouldn't be that big of a deal. But again, if you want him to do that more, let him know how much you appreciate that. Because again, truthfully, like your husband, like he wouldn't have married you if he didn't love you and want to marry you. And so he does want to please you. I mean, that's one thing I see so many husbands, they're so frustrated with themselves that they don't know how to make their wife happy. Like I hear one of the most common things I hear from husbands is, I just want her to be happy. I just want her to be happy. And so if he's doing something that is making you happy, please let him know, because he's going to want to do that more. So let's see here. I feel like I'm talking really fast, but there's a lot of stuff I'm trying to get through this. So if y'all need, Amy, if I'm not totally paying attention to the chat thing, so if there is a question, feel free to jump in and interrupt me if I skip over it. So, okay, so the other one is number 5 I have here is being careless with words spoken in anger. You know, I always say that, like, well, I don't always say this, I've heard this from other places, but the topics that you argue about in the beginning of your marriage are likely going to be the same topics that you argue about like 10, 20, 30 years into your marriage. If you argue about in-laws, you're going to keep arguing about in-laws. If you argue about money, you're probably going to keep arguing about money. If you argue about sex, you're going to keep arguing about sex. So those topics, hopefully you'll make some progress and they'll get a little bit better. But the thing that you need to focus on doing is like fighting fair, is how you argue, how you have those conversations, because that's where, I mean, I can tell you, you know, my husband and I, we still have a lot of the same like topics that tend to come up and, you know, cause more conflict. But the way that we have learned to communicate from when we first got married to now is like night and day. And I cringe when I look back at how, when in my early years of marriage, how I would communicate and express myself. But so just be so careful, because what couples will end up fighting about is they're fighting about how they're fighting, and they've completely lost sight of the actual issue. And so those words, when you're just mad and you're just angry and you're hurt, and you know, and what I think we've probably talked in the past here about like the whole like the amygdala hijacking the fight or flight. And so when your amygdala, that fight or flight part of your brain, like hijacks your prefrontal cortex and you lose all ability to think reasonably and rationally. If that has happened, if you are in fight or flight mode and you are in an interaction with your husband, please walk away. Please walk away. Because again, I think that, you know, a lot of men, like I said before, when they do get hurt or triggered or upset, their default mode often is to disengage and to walk away. And so if you've thrown out words that have been really hurtful, you may not even know, because he may just like shut down and walk away. And you're like, wow, where's he going? And you might just like, you know, just send a dagger through his heart for all you know. And so we don't always know those things that are really sensitive spots. So just be very careful. You know, I learned, you know, several years into my marriage was, you know, again, recognizing in myself, you know, we both like are super passionate people. And so we both get, you know, really into what we believe in, why we believe in, our sides of the, you know, and so, you know, I learned that when my heart starts beating really fast, and I feel this like energy, like pulsing through my body, like that is not a helpful time to have a conversation with my husband. Like, it's just not ever. And so, you know, I would say like, hey, I need to take a break. And we'll talk about this later. And sometimes he would say that. And so I can tell you that was always better, because then you're able to have those conversations when you do have full access to your prefrontal cortex, and you can actually make the conscious decision of, should I say this or should I not? Is this going to be helpful or is it not helpful? So be very careful with that. The next one is, let's see, not recognizing his need for downtime. So it's funny, I realized, again, a couple years into our marriage that we had different ideas, and maybe you have a husband that's not like this, so good for you if you do, but I realized early in our marriage we had different ideas of how Saturday mornings would go. and how Saturdays would go in general. So my mind was, we've both been working all week. Saturdays, we're going to focus on housework. We're going to get up and we're going to do chores, and we're going to get the house all clean, and he's going to be in the yard, and we're going to get a lot done, and that will be super fun. And then Saturday night, then we can go out and, have fun together, going out, whatever. So that was not my husband's idea of how to spend his Saturday. He loves football. He's a huge football fan. So, you already know what that means for like several months out of the year. So he works hard during the week as well. And his way is he likes to just sit and relax and, look at the news or football, or just chill out, or watch the History Channel, or read, and you know what? He doesn't feel bad about it at all. And so he enjoys that. And you know what? It took me a couple of years to realize that he actually needs that. And that's okay. And if I'm honest with myself, I do get a sense of satisfaction as a female of like straightening and organizing and kind of cleaning my home a little bit. And if I'm honest, I kind of would prefer that. Like if somebody said, well, you know what, Julie, it's okay. You can just sit on the couch Saturday morning and just watch movies, and it's okay. Like in my personality, I'm not saying everybody's like this. I wouldn't want to do that. I would rather be up, bustling around doing stuff around the house. And so I had to finally reach a place of honesty and be like, okay, this is my preference. This is my preference, and this is his preference. As long as we get the stuff done that we need to get done, in our home at some point, like he needs to have a little bit of downtime, and that's okay. And again, me like nagging him and just being a pain and just, harping, it's just not helpful. It doesn't produce like helpful results. And so why am I going to keep doing that? And so again, I think just respecting that we are just different, and that is okay. God made us different. I don't know if you guys knew this, you probably do, but like even temperaments of babies, if you have more than one child, that, and this isn't a male or female thing necessarily, but every child has a little different temperament. I mean, there's some, babies that you put there on the, you lay them on a little blanket on the floor and they're just kicking their arms and legs. They're just moving and they're looking around, and then you put some on the floor and they just lay there and they're content to look at the fan and just watch it spin around. And that's a temperament thing. And so if, often, probably almost all the time, not always, but in marriages, we end up with somebody with the opposite temperament from us. There's usually one that's a little bit more, driven, and one that's, a little bit more, just calm, and that's okay. So let's see here. So the next one I have is, I talked a little bit about this whole idea last time when I talked about self-care and just guarding your thoughts, but thinking that the grass is greener in someone else's marriage, be just super careful with that. Usually when you're hanging out with other families and couples, they don't like put all their issues on display, and, you don't see all of that. Husbands, you don't see all the failures and the faults. And so it's very easy, when you're, hanging out with other couples or families, to be like, wow, look at that husband. Like he always helps with the dishes, or, like, wow, look at how he compliments her, or, and so what ends up happening is you end up comparing your husband's weaknesses with somebody else's strengths. And then you end up kind of going into this like self-pity thing. And that's just never helpful, because if you knew all of the issues or all of the truth, chances are, maybe that other person does have strengths that your husband has weaknesses in, but probably there's a lot on the other way around as well. And so just be really, really careful. Again, you never know the whole story. You never know. And I've seen, unfortunately, just in my work here, as a counselor, so many of those couples that you would just think that everything was just perfect and wonderful, and they look like they have the perfect marriage. There's just some really, really, really hard stuff going on, behind closed doors. And so it's just, there's absolutely no value at all in any way to look at other, to compare. So just don't do that. It's not good. And the other thing it also can do is it keeps you from investing in your own marriage. It keeps you from doing the work that you need to do, like as a wife, and and working on what you need to be doing. Because the other thing I will say too is, and just to self-disclose, early in my marriage, I didn't realize the danger of this yet. I would let my mind wander sometimes, and I would be my husband and I would get in a big fight, and I was so mad at him, and I would see like, wow, this person doesn't act like this, and that person doesn't act like that. And so I would kind of let my mind drift and to imagine what it would be like, with this or that. And at one point, I can't remember exactly what happened, but I became very convicted about that just opening that door in my mind was super, super, super dangerous. And I think it was, just seeing so many couples that were struggling through affairs, because no Christian couple is ever going to start out with getting married saying, like, I want to have an affair someday, or I'm eventually going to have an affair. I'm going to be married 10 years and then have an affair. Like, it never starts that way. And so it always starts with the little innocent thoughts that you think mean absolutely nothing. But if you are letting yourself indulge in any thought that is other than honoring your marriage, just stop. And if you can't just stop, then talk to somebody that you trust and tell them that you're having struggle, or that you're struggling with that. Because I can tell you, as soon as you expose that thought to another person that is another Christian that's for your marriage, that gets you and it's trying to help, you follow God, it's going to take the power right out of it. It's going to diffuse it, and it's not going to go anywhere. So that is definitely my advice. But what happens with a lot of, especially Christians, is that, we know that those thoughts are wrong, and so we don't tell anyone that we're having those thoughts. And then they get bigger and they get bigger and they get bigger, and then they turn into this wildfire, and that's where crazy things happen. So it's, being tempted is not the sin, right? It's what you do with that thought once it comes. So do you hang on to it, do you hold it, or do you cast it off? So if you need help, in talking to a friend to cast it off, then please do that, because your marriage is absolutely worth it. You have to protect your marriage at all costs, for the sake of your children as well. Okay, so how are we doing on time, Amy? Oh, I can't hear you. Oh.
We've got about 15 minutes left, so okay. You can keep going, and then we'll save the last few minutes for questions.
Okay. Okay, so I've got two more. Believe in marriage should be 50-50.
Hey, Julie.
Yes.
I'm sorry, but I think you skipped number 7.
Did I? Oh, thank you.
Yep. I don't want to miss out on it.
I had missed it. I thought I was writing and missed it, so I'm glad you said something.
I was expecting you guys to read my mind on number 7. Yeah, so that's a really important one. Thank you very much. Tanya, is that?
Yeah.
Expecting him to mind read and not clearly communicating expectations. This one is, it's such an innocent mistake. It really is. And it's something that we probably all do. I mean, if you've ever said or thought the words, wow, if he really loved me, I wouldn't have to tell him. If he really cared, I wouldn't have to tell him to, this or that. That is just false. It's just false. Your husband is not wired the same way as you. He doesn't think the same way as you. His expectations are different than you. So one of the things, with expectations is they're often based on our upbringings, just kind of how we were raised. And so a great example is like holidays, birthdays, right? So holidays and birthdays were handled a certain way in your home. Maybe they were made into a huge deal. Maybe they weren't really a big deal at all. I happen to be in a marriage where in my upbringing, birthdays were a super big deal. It was a really big deal. And so the whole day kind of revolved around it's your birthday, what do you want to do for dinner? What do you, we have a party. And with my husband's family, it was more like, oh yeah, happy birthday. And it wasn't really that much of a big deal. And so that caused a few hurtful conversations at the beginning of our marriage. But so again, my husband wasn't doing anything wrong. He wasn't trying to be mean. He didn't not love me because he wasn't making a big deal about my birthday. He just didn't know that was a big deal to me. And he didn't quite understand why it should be, because that was not his experience at all. And so, honestly, we both moved much more towards the middle on that. And so, I think just communicating hey, I mean, literally I had this conversation with my husband, what is actually really special to me is when I wake up, like on my birthday, if you just say like, kind of first, like when you see me in the morning, like happy birthday, like that really means a lot to me. And so now it's really cute because like, even like before we're out of bed in the morning at my birthday, he'll lean over, happy birthday. And so like, I know like he's really but I had to tell him that, like, if I didn't, and so it's worth it to just say it because he's not trying to hurt me or upset me. So that's just an example. Household duties again, like I grew up in like the really traditional family where, my mom did like most of the chores inside and my dad, was responsible for most of the chores outside. And, like you just had your mindset on kind of how things, oh, my husband hates doing the lawn. I don't do the lawn either, but, so we just still try to figure that one out. But just having those conversations, don't expect that he thinks the same way you do. And the other thing is that, so as women, like we're really good at like making little subtle implications to each other. And we know kind of what that means. And so like, if we were to say, well, like, for example, I mean, like as women, like if you're with another friend and, I've been around women before where they'll do this and say like, oh my gosh, I just am so tired. I just never have any time on my hands. And I don't have anyone to help watch my kids. And, I wish I could just go and like get my hair cut. I just don't have time to do this. Well, as a woman, as another mom, like, oh my gosh, like, well, how about I'll watch your kids for you? Or let me help you with that. Or, like, what can I do to help? And we kind of intuitively know that that's, kind of how you respond to that. Well, with a man, well, how he would respond is like, well, that's thanks for you, or that's too bad, hate to be you. I mean, he doesn't take that as a, he takes it for what it is. And so, again, it's so interesting how men and women are wired differently. With men, it's almost like there's this honor code. Like you don't impose yourself on another man. You don't assume that he wants your help or is asking for your help unless he asks for your help. But with women, we don't want to put people out. We don't want to like put these expectations. So we do absolutely know that if another woman is voicing a need in our presence, that she is kind of asking like, hey, can you help me with this? So how this translates into marriage is like, wow, the trash sure is looking full. Doesn't look like it's been taken out in a while. Yeah, you're right. Walks on the other room. So, and then we're mad because I can't believe he didn't take out the trash. Like he sees how full it is. I just told him the trash needs to be taken out. And he could fairly say, well, actually, no, you didn't ask me to take the trash out. You just pointed out that it's full, which is just stating a fact. It's not making a request. So for men, again, your husband is not necessarily trying to be difficult if this is his natural way of thinking. Again, I told you my husband's an IT guy. He's very logical. So what men actually do tend to respect more is if you can say, hey, the trash is really full. Would you mind please taking it out as soon as you get a chance? I really need it taken out before I start dinner. Sure, great. Yeah, no problem. Like he knows exactly what you're asking. Again, he wants to make you happy and he can do that. And so chances are, unless there's some other issue going on, like he wants to do that for you. And so being like really clear and specific is you're helping yourself and you're helping him. Does that make sense? Okay. Thank you, Amy, for nodding your head. I'm so used to being in a room with like real life people that it just feels so weird. I mean, I can still see y'all's faces, which is nice, but it's usually much more interactive. Let's see. Oh, and the other thing I just want to say too, this is where, again, you need to let it sounds really like kind of weird, I know, but you kind of need to let your husband know like how you need to be like complimented, like how you need to be told that he loves you. A lot of husbands like literally don't know if they've ever told you that they love you, like you should know. I mean, it hasn't changed. He would let you know if something changed, and so for him, it may not make sense. Like, why should he have to tell it to you more than once, especially not every day? Like, that's just silly, And so like, it's okay to say, hey, it just helps me feel really reassured. And it just feels really good for me to hear that from you. Like, I really like to hear it every day, because I know you do love me. And so it just is helpful for me to hear it. Again, most husbands, I mean, he might be like, well, that's weird. I don't understand that, but that's okay. He doesn't have to understand it, but voice it. Don't get mad at him 10 years later because he hasn't told you he loves you in 10 years. And he's like thinking that you're being ridiculous because you told him that he told you that he loved you on your wedding day, and why should he have to say it again? So just don't be hesitant to tell him what you need. Okay, so 2 more. Believing that marriage should be 50-50. And again, maybe you guys have heard this before, but it's really never 50-50. Again, I think in healthy marriages, it kind of swings back and forth, so I think we alternate times that each of us are probably, a little bit more needy and a little bit more in a position to give. So hopefully, it's not always you giving more, and hopefully it's not always your husband giving more. But realize that, if you go through a season where, maybe your husband is going through hard stuff at work, or maybe he's dealing with some health issues, or maybe he's dealing with some other stuff, and you do feel like you're giving more. And maybe you really are, but that is like, okay, because there's probably going to be a time when you're going through something really hard, maybe with your family or with some girlfriends, or maybe the kids or your health, and he's going to be giving more. And so again, don't, just try to keep your heart in check and not get like bitter and resentful about that. But again, just being able to have, I think one of the most important things in marriage is to be able to communicate assertively, but well, in a kind way. Because if you feel like it is getting too out of balance, you don't want to start building resentment. And that's the point that you do need to just let him know, like how, hey, I'm starting to feel a little resentful because I feel like I'm doing too much, and maybe there's stuff you're doing that I don't even see, but like, can we talk about this? And so just have that honest communication. So I remember a friend of mine back when we were first married, probably the first year or 2 of our marriage, she said, one thing that we've learned in our marriage is that we can't both lose it at the same time. So as long as, you take turns losing it, then it's okay, because you can be there for each other. So, and the last one I have on here is thinking that your husband is the one that needs to change. That is a big one, because truthfully, I'm sure your husband needs to change. I'm sure he has things that he needs to change. But you know what? Like, so do you, if you're honest. We all do. We all do. I mean, Paul in the Bible said he hadn't already achieved it. We're still pressing on towards that prize. And so I think, one of the signs, like I realized, in my own marriage is, I've always been a journaler. I love kind of writing down my prayers. It kind of helps keep me more focused and stuff. And in the first several years of my marriage, it was a lot of like, God, just help him change this, help him change this. And, he needs to fix this. And I just spent so much energy focused on what my husband needed to be doing differently. And, his attitude, this or that, or whatever it was. And I realized as I, grew a little bit, is that there is nothing that I can do that can actually make my husband change, absolutely nothing. And so for me, putting all of my energy on trying to make him change is absolutely pointless. It's totally pointless, and it's a waste of time, and it's a waste of energy. But you know what I can do, what I do have control over, is I can actually seek the Lord and allow him to work in my life to change me. And what's beautiful is that when you allow the Lord to change you and to work in your heart and to make your heart be more kind of where it needs to be, it actually ends up changing your husband as well. Because it takes 2 to tango, but it only takes 1 to change the dance. So if you change, it's going to change the dynamic in your marriage. So if you're focused on trying to change him, just stop, because it's not going to help, and you're going to be exhausted, and you're going to be frustrated, and you're going to be bitter and resentful. And there are things still that God is working on you as well. And I think too, I remember, again, the early years of my marriage, I remember reading, it was one of the books about praying for your husband. And it said, if you have an issue with your husband, it's something that you want him to change, don't necessarily go to him about it, but pray to God about it and ask God to speak to him about it. And I remember thinking, well, that just seems like not a very efficient way to do things. I mean, I remember thinking like, well, that sounds good in theory, but I think I need to say something too, you know? But you know what? Like, she was right. Because it's actually way more efficient to actually like go to God about it rather than going to my husband about it, because like God has like total access to his heart at all times. And I don't. And chances are, if I go to him and I'm in the wrong, if I have the wrong spirit about me, if I'm in the wrong frame of mind and I try to confront him on something, chances are I'm going to make it worse because I'm going to say it in the wrong way and it's going to make him angry and then he's going to take his heels in. But if the Holy Spirit is the one that's convicting him, you know, I've literally had times where, you know, I'll go on walks. So I like to walk in the morning by myself, like with our dogs, and just pray and stuff. And there have been times that there'll be something that's on my mind and I'll be like, God, can you just please like, you know, like reveal this to him or speak to him about this or, you know, whatever. And it might be something that we've never talked about, like my husband and I never talked about. And there's been times I'll get back and I'll walk in the house and be like, hey, Julie, like, can you sit down? I really want to talk to you about this. And I'll just, you know, like, thank you God so much, you know, and he really does like advocate for us. I mean, I want you guys to know that, you know, you are not alone in this. And there's gonna be times that you're doing all this and it feels like it's wasted. Like your husband is not appreciating it. He doesn't see it. He's not doing his part. And that's going to happen. But that's okay, because ultimately you're not doing it for your husband, you're doing it for Jesus. And so when you are loving your husband out of your love for Jesus, like nothing is wasted. And so when you're sitting there interacting with your husband and you're thinking, okay, he does not get it, like this is so frustrating, like literally picture Jesus standing right behind his shoulder. Just picture Jesus's face and picture Jesus like kind of giving you that look like, I got it, I'm with you, good job, keep it up, you know. And so ultimately, like whatever we do it for the Lord and not for men. So I wrote a verse in here. I know I'm almost out of time, Amy, so I'm trying to hurry up. This has become one of my favorite verses for marriage. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Forgive each other. It's just, remember that as chosen people, holy and dearly loved, you're already loved. You're already loved. And because you know you're already loved, that is the only reason why you can do all those other things. So with that, I'll stop.
Oh, it was so great. I wish you could keep going. I do have, as always, I have writer's cramp after this, but are there any, I love that verse too. I started that verse because it covers so many things. I mean, you know, and if we're praying that verse for our marriage, it pretty much covers our heart, his heart. So I love that. Also, I did want to say before we take questions, a couple of years ago, and I know we have a lot of new people, so you may not have it, but a couple of years ago, I gave a handout that was different scriptures to pray for your husband. And so I will add that to the resource page because, again, when you are praying for your husband's heart, and you are going to the Lord on behalf of your husband, it changes your heart. And I loved the thing when you said it takes two to tango. I've never heard the other part of that, but it only takes one space to dance. And so when your heart is right and when you are lifting your husband up, it gives the Lord so much opportunity to work. So I will send those prayers out on the resource page. So, and that verse was Colossians 3:12-14 that she was referencing. It's on the handout that should have been emailed to everybody. Let me look at the chat. Does anybody have any specific questions? And just feel free to unmute yourself if you want and ask a question. Julie, do you have a couple minutes still?
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah.
It's hard because a lot, you may just have to start talking because like Julie said, we can't see everybody. So if you raise your hand, we can't see you. So feel free to just go ahead and ask your question without raising your hand if you need to. And we'll try to keep an eye on the screens. So, one thing that Julie, that you shared that really spoke to me was about when you focus on someone else's marriage and you focus on, you know, like, oh, I wish look, I saw how he did the dishes or whatever, and when you're focusing on someone else's marriage, you're not allowed, it prohibits you from investing in yours and focusing on yours. It reminded me some time ago, somebody said to me, you're either, if you're not walking towards God, you're walking away from God. I mean, that's your, so we should always be walking towards God and always investing in our own marriage. So if we're focusing on someone else's marriage, we're not able to focus on ours. Just as we're not walking toward the Lord, we're walking away from him. So,
and it's, and also too, I mean, like, it's never motivating to your husband to point out how another husband is so good at washing the dishes every night. That actually lead to, oh wow, I should be more like him.
Yeah, that was, I like that. Thank you for sharing that. And Julie will be back next week, or not, sorry, the next time we meet on the 13th. So again, there'll be other opportunities. If you guys think of things, have time to kind of marinate on this, and then like, oh, I didn't think about that. I'd like to ask a question. She'll be back in 2 weeks, and then again on our very last one.
Well, and Amy too, if I can just say, like, I think, as a lot of the stuff that I share, I feel like it's not necessarily like a ton of new information necessarily. It's stuff that maybe we kind of know or have heard, but it's more, I think, just like a kind of reminder, like, I know we know this, let's just kind of remember to do it,
Reminders, yes.
So that accountability piece and talking about it, I think sometimes can be helpful.
Yeah. One other thing you shared too that really resonated with me was that when you have thoughts, I think, or wandering thoughts or whatever they are, thoughts that are not, good for your marriage or good for your family or whatever, I think there's always this perception that we shouldn't share those thoughts because they're bad. So I love how you shared to expose your thoughts, because that to somebody you trust, because that kind of, when you expose it, it nips it. Or that was, I had not heard that before, so that was great.
I think it's really, honestly, the best like prevention for like, letting yourself fall into, really affair proofing your marriage, is just having that person that if you have any thoughts at all, that, you're going to just tell them, hey, I'm just letting you know that I'm struggling with this. And it doesn't have to be struggling. It could just be like, and what really can be helpful is if it gets really, hard, is like, tell your husband, like, hey, I'm struggling with some thoughts. And again, that could be a harder conversation, but better that, better, hey, I just want you to know I'm struggling with some thoughts, as opposed to, what could result from that. I've seen that happen too many times. So.
I just want to say thank you. I've been married 28 years, and all of these are just so, they're just so on point. They're just yes, yes, yes. The two big ones for me would be not prioritizing your marriage, because the longer you've been married, the more you see the effect of that when you don't prioritize your marriage. And I'm in the stage where I see a lot of my friends getting divorced or having marital problems because they put their kids first and haven't nurtured their marriage. And then the next one would be that I learned early on was criticizing his way of doing things. Mm-hmm. I remember saying, like you said, I would go out and I'd come home and the diaper wasn't put on the way I would do it, or, he washed laundry the way that I wouldn't wash it. And his intentions were to be helpful and to be loving. And I criticized that and hurt his spirit. But also, when you're doing that too, you're not allowing him to be a dad, to be his own, to let your kids see him as, a leader and another parent, where you're trying to be, do it yourself, and there's only one way to do it. So that's such an important point. It was for me to be able to let go of that and let him do things the way that he would do it. And that was another way for the kids to, see individuality and to, and to respect him.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's really good.
This is such great wisdom, and just for at this point in your marriage, I wish so thankful for the reminder, and I wish that I had this when I was young in my marriage, and think of the conversations that we could have prevented, or just I could have handled differently or better. So this was a gift to have Julie here this morning to share. So I want to thank you again. I know next time you're talking about, I believe it's how to communicate with your child. And for me personally, having 4 kids, what works for one does not work for, it's not one size fits all. And I can say one thing to one and she gets it, and the other has no idea. And I have to really be careful how I say my words. And so I'm looking really forward to that one, because I know there's a lot that I can continue to learn as I learn to communicate with my children in different ways because of their different personalities or their different temperaments. I think you said that. I had even thought back when my kids were laying on the mat, and to pay attention to how one's, wiggling and squirming and how one's just laying there. I think there's so many things as when they're little babies that they do that maybe we're so tired and just trying to make it through the day that we don't recognize, and so I thought that was really helpful too, just to, and a good kind of set the format for, or set the tone for next time as we start talking about communicating with our children and their temperaments. So thank you again. One last, just if anyone has a comment or question real quickly, we can, we've got time for one, and then we can close out.
I see one question.
Okay, who was it?
Is that Vicki?
Yes, hi. A lot of times that I see is, and I was just approached with this weekend from someone that I know, is that so many times parents get involved with, I'll take this one there, I'll take this one there, and then they're never really together, and people never see them as a couple. They see them chasing after one and chasing after the other, and it has resulted in problems within a marriage. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to guard that. Probably none of our children are going to be NFL stars or soccer pros. And we need to realize, I think sometimes, that when we're chasing too many different directions, that we chase too much separately and don't do enough to come together.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. Yeah, prioritizing and having some individual time with the kids a little bit, but not having all of your time be individual. Having some family, just husband and wife time and family time.
Yeah, because we had a situation where someone said, well, I could understand why they have problems because no one sees them together as a family or as a couple. And I think that leads a signal to other people that they may be open for something else. And I think you've got to really guard against that.
Good wisdom. Thank you.
I would like to say something if I could. Julie, thank you. I think the whole thing has been excellent for me, who's been married 45 years, and for everybody it's just been less. But what really spoke to me this morning, I just wanted to mention, was so many times I'm the more assertive, emotional one. And my husband has a tendency to be, like you were saying, he would be quiet. And I think that the perception sometimes has been that he didn't care. So it was very helpful for me to hear what you said, that just that push-pull of we want to keep pursuing and hammer it, and they turn and run. I mean, or get alone. So, but thank you. It helped me, I know he cares. I know he loves me, but the way that we deal is so different. So thank you. And I think everyone probably got a lot out of that too.
Yes, thank you. Julie, I do have one question, and I'm probably going to not articulate this or call it the right thing, but you mentioned the part develops back here, and there's a part here that develops, and where people are different, and fight or flight. And do you have a handout or anything that kind of identifies different stages or people go through, or it's some sort of resource that you would recommend to help us understand what happens in our mind when this happens? This is what happens. Like if A happens, then B.
So I don't personally have a resource, but the one place that explains the whole dynamic very well is there's a book called The Whole Brain Child,
Okay.
which we might have mentioned before. It's actually a parenting book, and it's the similar dynamic with both anger and anxiety and fear is the similar parts of the brain. So that's just a great book to have regardless as a parent, and even, just as an adult, because it really, really explains how the brain works in those different stages.
Okay.